Greetings and welcome to week one, lecture two. So, as a lead pastor over the last 10 years, and then as a pastor as a whole for the last 17, I've been in the position of having to call pastors, hire pastors, bring them on staff, and then I've had to remove several as well from leadership roles. And when I'm trying to make the decision about who to call, I exercise what's called the 4 C's. And a friend of mine by the name of Darren Brown gave me these several years back. And he talks about the 4 C's being competency, chemistry, character, and calling. Now, when you're talking in terms of the invitation onto a church staff role or into ministry as a whole, chemistry is something that you hope is developed over time as synergy begins to emerge from the kind of atmosphere and environment that is created among a team. Competencies, that you may be looking for a certain level of competency, but competencies, if a person is committed, can be developed and cultivated in a person's life. And if they have strong character, I'll work a long time on competencies. It's the calling piece that we really have nothing to do with as someone who's looking to call someone to be a part of a church staff. That calling piece has to be absolutely clear. Throughout my course of ministry, just here at Bridgeway Community Church, we've had almost 20 different people step up and want to become either local or district licensed ministers in the Church of the Nazarene. And one of the things that I do with every single person that walks through my door is they'll sit down on my couch and they'll say, I feel like I'm called to ministry. And I say to them, I walk them through the process, what it's going to look like, but I say, I'm not going to do anything further right now because I'm going to send you away, and I need you to come back to me at some point and say that I know that I'm called to serve God in vocational ministry. Because if we don't know, we won't last. And that is something that is really important. In fact, when I first made my calling known, I was at a funeral and I was being introduced to this gentleman, and this gentleman says to me that he had been a pastor for 50 years. And when the person introduced me, he says, "This is Jeff, and he's called to pastor," the guy looks at me and says, "What else could you do?" And I said, "Excuse me, sir?" And he said, "What else could you do?" And I said, "Well, sir, to be honest, I don't know that there's anything else I could do. I feel like I'm supposed to do this." And he says, "Well, good, because if you can think of anything else that you could do, go do it, because when the going gets tough, you're going to go do it anyways." And man, that just landed and lingered with me for a long time, because that is so true throughout the course of my ministry. That had I been able to think about those other things that I would prefer to do, want to do, wish to do, then to be honest with you, I don't know that I would have still been in where I am currently. Because I think when we talk about the calling to ministry, there's this initial sort of excitement, right? God has chosen me. I mean, now that excitement is mixed with a whole bunch of humility, in the sense that, who am I? Am I qualified? Like all of those questions that we ask. But the thought of the privilege of being able to join God and what God is up to in this world and be a part of that is, I think, just a phenomenal opportunity for us. And so I want to suggest to us that it starts with maybe intimidation and humility on the front end, but then quickly moves to this sense of sense of excitement. Now, as we get into it, that's where we sort of experience, I think, our first shock that, oh my goodness, this ministry thing isn't what I thought it was going to be like. People aren't what I thought they were going to be like. People aren't always nice to pastors. Like, there's no real authority in I thought if I had the title of pastor, that would matter. And now that I've got the title of pastor, I'm sort of serving in ministry in some way. All of a sudden, now maybe those aren't as important as I thought they were going to be. So there's this sense of shock, and I really enjoy being able to walk with young leaders through that process of shock, because they have to again wrestle with that sense of calling. Why am I here? Am I here for the authority? Am I here for the prestige? Am I here for what I felt like was going to give me this sense of validation? And I'm finding out that validation is often absent. Why am I here? Is it a sense of calling? But then I think a lot of us have this sort of internal drive that can sort of push through those moments of shock, and we just sort of push on and drive on. But we don't ultimately make a lot of changes and decisions. We don't necessarily always learn learn a lot about ourselves in the process. And so we just continue to push on the way we've always pushed on. This is where spiritual formation becomes such a big deal, because spiritual formation is the process by which we are development and trained and refined, so that as we emerge from that initial shock, we're being given new tools, new processes, new ways of engaging God, so that I can run this race longer than I might have otherwise, right? And so it's, if we don't do anything different when we move out of the shock that ministry isn't what I thought it was going to be, and we just try to push through, that pushing through is going to leave us frustrated, because again, we're not going to get from it what we had hoped to get from it, and exhausted, because there's no end to what we feel like we're supposed to do. And we're going to talk about that in just a few moments. And so it starts with excitement, moves towards shock. We push through. We may have some great joys, some great experiences along the way, but then we get tired. And when that tired happens, we get exhausted. And here's what I have come to recognize about exhaustion. Now, understand, I come from recovery language because I've been through recovery myself, and there's this language we use called HALT, that you are most susceptible to falling prey to temptation when you're either overly hungry, when you're overly angry, when you're overly lonely, or when you're overly tired. And I find that for pastors, frustration, anger, which is often unvoiced because we feel like it's unholy to voice our anger, so we bottle it up, or exhaustion tends to play itself out in some substantial ways in our lives. And it's what sets us up for a couple different things. One, it could set us up for just a stumble and a fall, right? So we fall prey to the lust of the eyes, or the lust of the flesh, and by that I can mean anything that is unseemly in the eyes of God, right? And so we give ourselves justification because of the way we're feeling, or how beat down we are, how exhausted we feel, or how beat up we feel by the ministry that we've given ourselves so passionately to, that we give ourselves permission and justification for acting in ways that are inconsistent with what God is calling us to. So I think that's one of the things. The other one that I see happen all the time is just bitterness. Bitterness creeps into the soul of a pastor, and it makes us cynical to the ministry as a whole. I have navigated substantial seasons of my life where I have felt that bitterness creep in. And there's something about when the scripture says, do not let this bitter root go down and defile us, that we need to be paying attention to, because that bitterness will make us cynical toward the people we lead, cynical towards the ministries we lead, cynical to the church as a whole, cynical towards the successes and the joys and the salvations that we see happening in someone else's ministry. We move then into comparisons, and that bitterness then creeps in, and then if it's left unattended to, if we don't seek counseling, if we don't seek spiritual direction, if we don't carve out time for sabbatical, if we don't carve out time for Sabbath, all of these things that we're going to be talking about throughout this course, then what's going to end up happening is we're going to find ourselves in burnout. And burnout is really, I think, the happens too often. I think it becomes the norm for pastoring. And having been in ministry now 17 years, I can say that is a very real thing. And have navigated substantial seasons of my life when I felt like I was either in burnout or moving very, very perilously close towards burnout. Because here's what we have to understand about ministry, and this is why formation becomes so impressive. The rhythms of grace that sustain us over the long haul. One, there's no clock to ministry. We don't have a job that operates by 5/8 a week, or 4/10s, or 3/12s like many of the people that we work with. There's no clock to ministry. Ministry happens all day long, every day. It's on our hearts, our minds, our thoughts all the time. We can get called out at any time of night. We're on call. Even when we're on vacation, we find ourselves on call. Even when we're on vacation, we're checking our voicemail, we're checking our email, those types. There's no clock to ministry. We understand that. There's no completion of tasks. I mean, a lot of times when my friends, they go to, I have found myself jealous of factory workers because they go to work, they do their thing, when they leave, they're done. When I leave, I tend to think of the 100 of things that I intended to get done during the day, but that I didn't get done because I had to deal with this, that, and the other. And those this, that's, and the others, some of them are incredibly important, and they leave us wounded or broken for someone that we love deeply because of the wounds and the brokenness that they themselves are experiencing. And no matter how many needs met, and then I think this is really important, no matter how many needs that we feel like we meet in a day, we're always feeling like we're leaving someone letting someone down or leaving someone out. And I think that in itself can sort of be bottled up within us, or we experience a lack of gratitude, a lack of appreciation. And so we give ourselves away because there's no money in ministry. We know that. It's not like any of us are getting rich on it. And in fact, a lot of times we end up losing money. We end up finding ourselves trying to muddle through or get by because there's just not a lot of money in ministry. And so there's moments when we just needed that affirmation. We just needed that appreciation, that we just needed that say, hey, man, thank you so much. This person that we've given ourselves away to, they just get up and walk out and they leave and they don't even let us know why they're going. And those things get so hard. And if we're not rooted in our calling and we're not rooted in the spiritually formative practices of the church, what's going to happen is we begin to bottle up all that bitterness, because we're as leaders in the church, as ministers, we're not very good at doing healthy frustration and anger. We don't have places to feel safe to vent that. And you've got to have those places. You've got to have those friends that you can speak that anger, that frustration, that those challenges that you're experiencing to, so that someone else can help you share in those burdens. But we don't do that. So that bitterness creeps in. We become cynical, and ultimately you pair that with exhaustion, possibly some breaches in integrity, and you find yourselves in burnout. And then we become one of the statistics that I'm going to talk about a little bit, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the people that are impacted by our burnout. And so I want to talk a little bit about that in the collapse of the celebrity pastor, but also the way in which ministry, I think, puts pressures on us that few people understand, but that if we're not careful to, and we don't redefine who we are in ministry and find the sweet spot and lane for our ministry, that we could be some of those numbers that people look back and go, oh, they had so much possibility, but look at what happened. So we're going to talk about that in the next lecture.